그래, 알았어.
이거는 시나리오에 없던 건데. 어떡하지?
The Prison is a film that magnifies the grotesque horrors of the penitentiary system and the extreme distortion of human nature, whether it's the brutal scenes of torture and murder or the shrewd power plays within the prison walls. The movie masterfully demonstrates what it means to see the whole system through a single scene. It traces a chilling evolution from raw brutality to the calculated art of rulership, depicting how one man dominates everyone from the warden down, seizing total control. Without further delay, let's begin. The protagonist, Yu-gun, was once a veteran super detective known by the alias Hellwalker, because any criminal he targeted could never escape his grasp. But often, the higher one climbs, the easier it is to forget one's original sincerity, until it's too late for regrets. Yu-gun's brother was a journalist who had long wanted to investigate the notorious prison but never found a way in. He eventually turned to Yu-gun, who was on a rising career path, hoping to use his connections to get a glimpse inside the prison, but Yu-gun didn't take the matter seriously, thinking a small prison couldn't possibly cause any real trouble. Before Lu Jun had time to celebrate for long, devastating news arrived. His younger brother had been killed, and the murderer was unknown. As a super detective, Yu-gun naturally suspected it was the work of people inside the prison. He put in a request to be transferred into the prison, aiming to get close to the prison's kingpin, dead set on uncovering the truth and avenging his brother. But on his very first day, he encountered numerous crime bosses he had personally arrested. When they saw Yu-gun step out of the vehicle, they hurled insults at him. Not one to back down, Yu-gun spat at them, and the situation quickly descended into chaos. Fortunately, the guards broke it up, but Yu-gun's arrogance was soon dampened. Right now, Yu-gun is hanging upside down, his face bruised and battered. Clearly he's just been through a brutal beating. As it turns out, Yu-gun's been thrown into a cell packed with gang members he once arrested, and now they're having their sick fun turning him into their plaything. After being set down for a brief moment, he was again beaten and kicked, then dragged to the edge of a toilet. Chong-gil humiliated Yu-gun in the worst way, leaving him drenched in shame. But as Chong-gil turned to leave, Yu-gun suddenly laughed. Chong-gil, puzzled and thinking Yu-gun was mocking him, stomped on Yu-gun's head, pushing it toward the toilet pit. Seizing the opportunity, Yu-gun bit Chong-gil's ear, refusing to let go until it was nearly torn off. With Chong-gil now at a disadvantage, Yu-gun quickly turned the tables, holding him hostage and threatening the guards, demanding to see the warden. It turned out Yu-gun's plan was to lure the guards and get an audience with the warden. Yu-gun soon met the prison director. Yu-gun figured his former identity as a cop might give him some leverage, maybe even win him a few favors from the warden. He pointed out that they were both civil servants and that maybe one day, the warden might need a favor from him. Then he asked to be moved to a different cell, but the director dodged the question, avoiding any real answer. Just then, the office door opened, and a man entered, leading Yu-gun away. Yu-gun assumed he was being taken to a new cell. Completely unaware of the severity of the situation, the man suddenly stopped, and 6 inmates emerged, staring at Yu-gun like prey. Yu-gun was terrified, confused about why the guards were colluding with criminals. He soon learned their purpose. After a brutal beating, they dragged him to a cutting machine, as if awaiting judgment from a man slowly approaching. This man was the prison's true ruler, the one who had even appointed the warden. He operated large-scale criminal activities from within, sending inmates out to do his bidding, and was known for his ruthlessness. He had Yu-gun captured to warn him against causing trouble in the prison, but Yu-gun, unaware he was facing the prison's real king, retorted that they were all inmates and asked who gave him the right to lecture. Hearing this, the man, Eko, simply gestured to his subordinate, Hong Pyo. Understanding immediately, Hong Pyo and others lifted Yu-gun toward the cutting machine, threatening to saw off his arm to teach him a lesson. Terrified out of his wits, Yu-gun begged Eko for mercy, promising to obey in the future. Satisfied, Eko released him, and Yu-gun was so frightened he had wet his pants. After Eko and his men left, the guards locked Yu-gun in a solitary cell. Meanwhile, Eko began inquiring with the guards about Yu-gun's background. They said Yu-gun was imprisoned for bribing police and destroying evidence, calling him a madman known as Hellwalker because no target ever escaped his radar. Hearing this, Eko was not alarmed but pleased. In other words, Yu-gun was a highly capable person. Meanwhile, Yu-gun was released from solitary confinement and brought to the yard for some sun. As soon as he stepped out, he ran into a former informant of his. While the two were chatting and laughing, an unwelcome voice interrupted them.
성경이님 나왔구나. 고생 많았지. 우리도 너 없어서 존나게 심심했어.
Not wanting to cause trouble, especially after Iko's warning. Yu-gun tried to walk away, but Chang-gil refused to let him off. Yu-gun, however, was no pushover. He grabbed a guard's baton and fought back against the surrounding thugs. This scene successfully caught Iko's attention. Iko immediately scolded Chang-gil and then ordered the two to settle their dispute through a fight. Whoever won would have the final say. The surrounding inmates cheered at the spectacle. After all, even prison life needed some excitement. Both men agreed to Iko's command and laid out their demands if they won. Yu-gun laid out his terms. If he won, he wanted a cell transfer and fried chicken for everyone in the block. Chang-gil's demand was simple. If he won, he wanted a big pile of cash. Iko didn't object and casually gave orders to the guards behind him. As soon as Iko finished speaking, the fight began. The two charged at each other without hesitation. After 2.5 minutes of fighting, Yu-gun's superior strength became evident. He quickly overpowered Chang-gil, leaving him unconscious on the ground. Having won the match, Yu-gun tried to curry favor with Iko to get closer to cracking the case, but Iko didn't even bother to look at him and simply walked away. Back in his cell, Yu-gun sat on the floor, devouring the fried chicken he'd won as his prize. Soon, the guards arrived to move him to a different cell. As he left, Yu-gun spat a chicken bone at Chang-gil, completely unaware of how important pride is to gang members. As Yu-gun was led away, he felt like he had entered another world. In this new cell block, inmates were playing chess and cards. Yu-gun soon arrived at his new cell. Just as Yu-gun was settling into his new quarters, Iko was already planning his next operation. He first had the prison director obtain the details for the next mission's location, then discussed the specific plans with his subordinates. It truly proved the saying everyone in prison is a talent. At night, when it was time to sleep, the prison guards came to open their cells, and they walked out unnoticed. In a nearby building, a man was reading a newspaper when the phone rang. As he reached for it, an explosion sent him flying. A group of well-equipped men stormed in, each with a clear role. Some cracked the safe, others handled cleanup, all focused on their tasks. The safe was quickly opened, and the man inside wasted no time bagging all the drugs. Once outside, the men removed their masks. Unsurprisingly, they were Iko's subordinates from the prison. Just as they thought they had succeeded and were returning to prison, the driver snatched the drug-filled backpack at a red light and fled. The others in the vehicle were caught completely off guard by this betrayal. Back at the prison, Iko and the prison director soon learned about the stolen drugs. The prison director was so enraged he slapped the guards twice. As they discussed how to handle the situation, a phone call came in. The prison director was stunned. Unsure why Director Bay was making a surprise visit, he hurriedly gathered his guards to line up and welcome him at the entrance. The prison director nervously asked why Director Bay had come unannounced. Director Bay bluntly replied, "Do I need your permission to visit?" Trembling with fear, the prison director led Director Bay on a tour of the prison. As they passed cell after cell, they soon reached Iko's block. Yu-gun was nearby tending to flower pots, while Hongpyo sat disciplining a subordinate. They panicked upon seeing Director Bay. Just as Director Bay commented that everything seemed orderly, Iko emerged. Recognizing Director Bay, Iko knew he couldn't act arrogantly. His influence didn't extend that high. But Director Bay had no intention of letting Iko off easily. The two had known each other for years, having crossed paths during Director Bay's inspections of other prisons.
차렷. 열중 쉬어. 열중 쉬어 이 새끼야.
그만하시죠.
새끼 이거 누가 이따구로 만들어놨어? 어?
The prison director rushed over and urged Iko to comply, but Iko remained defiant. Director Bay grew increasingly provocative, taunting Iko relentlessly. Unable to bear it any longer, Iko grabbed Director Bay's baton, prompting a cold laugh from the latter. As tensions escalated, Yu-gun suddenly stepped forward. He lashed out at Director Bay, accusing him of abusing his power and treating the inmates inhumanely, unleashing all his bottled-up rage. Yu-gun's intervention defused the standoff, redirecting the conflict onto himself, but his actions earned him Iko's gratitude. Despite Iko's fearsome reputation, Yu-gun was the only one who stood up for him in a critical moment. After Director Bay left, Iko privately met with Yu-gun. He asked Yu-gun what food he liked. Yu-gun named a dish that was impossible to get in prison, clearly testing Iko's capabilities. To his surprise, Iko agreed without hesitation. After he got out, Iko personally prepared sashimi for him. Under the influence of alcohol, the two began to talk. They first discussed why Yu-gun had stood up for him earlier. Then, Iko asked if Yu-gun would be willing to help him capture someone outside. Given his reputation as the Hell Walker, Eko promised to reward Yu-gun with 100 million won if he succeeded. Shocked by the offer, Yu-gun was taken outside by Eko to begin the manhunt. Yu-gun proved his worth using his own informants and intelligence network. He quickly tracked down a lead. The team immediately set up an ambush on the target's route. As time passed, they finally spotted the man and swiftly moved to surround him. Although the man was skilled, he was no match for Yu-gun, the Hell Walker. With a few moves, Yu-gun subdued him, solidifying his reputation in front of Eko. After being dragged back to prison, the man pleaded with Eko for mercy. Eko remained silent and pointed to a nearby table. Understanding the unspoken command, the man stood on the table and placed his neck into a noose under Eko's direction. The scene horrified Yu-gun, who almost fled in panic. But to his surprise, Eko kept his promise. He had Hongpyo bring Yu-gun the 100 million won. Stunned at the sight of the money, Yu-gun accepted it. The next day, he joined Eko's inner circle, becoming the second in command after Hongpyo. Hongpyo grew deeply resentful of Yu-gun's rising status and private meetings with Eko. So during the meal, Eko signaled his men to raise their glasses for a toast, but Hongpyo wore a displeased expression and refused to show respect. Seeing this, Yu-gun wasn't intimidated by Hongpyo and directly provoked conflict between the two. Watching the two confront each other, Eko stood up, grabbed the grill plate from the table, and smashed it against Hongpyo. Just after Hongpyo was attacked, Chang-gil received the news and immediately devised a plan to have the prison guard summon Hongpyo. As soon as he arrived, Chang-gil used the recent presence of Yu-gun to stir discord between Hongpyo and Eko, suggesting that Hongpyo might be cast aside by Eko and urging him to help eliminate Eko or at least not get in the way. Meanwhile, Yu-gun secretly made his way into the prison director's office. Having noticed a hidden compartment while cleaning earlier, he slipped in and began searching for information about his brother's death. After listening to the findings, Yu-gun realized that his brother, a renowned journalist, had been killed by Eko's orders. Overwhelmed, Yu-gun collapsed weakly to the floor. Just then, the office door suddenly opened. It was the prison director. After retrieving his watch, the director sensed something was wrong. As he glanced around, Yu-gun stood up and claimed he was there to clean, but the prison director didn't buy it and moved to frisk him, leaving Yu-gun sweating nervously. Fortunately, a young prison guard rushed in and demanded to know what Yu-gun was still doing there.
시키지도 않으시라고 그래?
제가 청소 좀 시켰습니다.
꺼져 당장.
Thanks to the guard, Yu-gun managed to escape the director's office. Though he was puzzled about why the guard helped him, he soon found out. The guard, who had been unable to gain any advantages within the prison, assumed Yu-gun had been stealing and began searching him. Unexpectedly, he found a stack of cash on Yu-gun. The guard took the money and declared he would keep it safe for Yu-gun, adding that any future activities would require his approval. Later, while the inmates were cooking, Hongpyo suddenly ordered everyone out, including Yu-gun. It turned out that Mr. Kim from the outside had come to deal with Eko regarding the drugs they had previously stolen. Once Eko entered, he sent both Yu-gun and Hongpyo away. Suspicious, Yu-gun sneaked toward the perimeter, hoping to spy on the transaction, but when he reached the outside, he noticed Hongpyo quietly closing the door as the deal proceeded inside. Yu-gun pressed against the window, watching carefully. Suddenly, a group of men led by Chang-gil armed with weapons stormed into the area where Eko and the others were. The people conducting the deal were stunned at the intrusion. Chang-gil and his crew were clearly there for Eko, aiming to take advantage of his isolation to eliminate him, but they had underestimated Eko.
사람은 어딜 가든 지 오야지를 잘 만나야 돼.
있어 이 새끼야 안 죽어.
내가 방에 들어와서 사람도 깔만 9개를 파먹었다.
Witnessing the scene, Chang-gil dropped to his knees in terror. He hadn't expected Eko to be so ruthless. Begging frantically for mercy, he even offered to become Eko's lackey. As Eko let his guard down and turned to wash his hands, Chang-gil seized the moment to launch a surprise attack. Just as Eko was about to be taken out by Chang-gil, Yu-gun leapt into action, kicking Chang-gil away. After a quick glance at Eko on the ground, Yu-gun plunged into a chaotic brawl with Chang-gil's crew. After a 2.5-minute fight, Yu-gun emerged as the last one standing. Then prison guards rushed in and put a stop to the violence. Due to his repeated troublemaking, Chang-gil was transferred to another prison. Soon, the transport vehicle arrived at a remote, deserted area. He stepped out and stretched, but by the time he realized what was going on, the vehicle had already driven off, leaving him stranded alone. In the next moment, with Chong-gil dealt with, Ik-ho gathered all his subordinates in the prison. He announced that there was a trial among them and said that if the person stepped forward voluntarily, he might spare their life. Ik-ho knew that despite the major commotion that day, only Yu-gun had shown up. The others must have been held back intentionally. As Ik-ho's intimidation grew overwhelming, Hongpyo dropped to his knees and began begging for mercy. Considering how long Hongpyo had been with him, Ik-ho decided not to handle it himself and instead handed the task over to Yu-gun. But as an undercover cop, Yu-gun couldn't bring himself to kill outright. Instead, he dragged Hongpyo to the very chainsaw that had once been used to threaten him, and sawed off one of Hongpyo's arms. Meanwhile, the prison director was outside playing frisbee with Director Bae, though Director Bae's real intention wasn't the game. While tossing the disc, he casually asked whether the prison director had cleaned everything up, leaving the latter confused.
몇 년새 집도 넓히고 전부 네 마누라 명의로.
Yu-gun slipped some cash to the same guard who had helped him before this time, to smuggle one of his colleagues inside. Yu-gun then met the detective in a storage room, handing over the evidence he had uncovered. The detective urged Yu-gun to stay safe and avoid risks, but Yu-gun insisted he must avenge his brother personally by breaking Ik-ho's neck. Back in the prison director summoned Ik-ho and his own subordinates. He came straight to the point. Ik-ho had been a model prisoner for 15 years, and his behavior had been impeccable. He told Ik-ho he would approve his parole and let him go free. Ik-ho got the message right away. They wanted him gone.
말단 간수 나부랭이 새끼 소장 견장까지 달게 해준 사람이 누군데 또 한 번 이딴 잔대가리 굴리면은 이 마누라 싹 엮어서 여자 교도소에 쳐넣어버립니다.
Seeing he had no leverage, the prison director fell silent. What followed was Ik-ho's revenge. Because Director Bae had overstepped repeatedly and tried to bring him down, Ik-ho gathered his men and set out to eliminate him. Once everyone was ready, they moved out. But Yu-gun wasn't idle while Ik-ho was in the restroom. He quietly called his detective contact and revealed the destination of Ik-ho's operation. The police immediately mobilized. When they arrived, however, the police were baffled. There were no signs of any crime. It was just a small ceramics factory. Ik-ho had actually brought Yu-gun to another location, telling him to stand watch. It turned out the group had kidnapped Director Bae and brought him to a rock crusher at a construction site. There, Ik-ho revealed his ambition. He intended to install the prison director in Director Bae's position and seize control of all prisons in South Korea. As soon as Ik-ho finished speaking, an underling flipped the power switch. Director Bae, sliding helplessly toward the machine, began desperately begging for his life, promising to resign immediately if released. But Ik-ho had no intention of letting him go. He coldly watched as Director Bae was fed into the crusher. Yu-gun could only stand by, powerless to intervene. Back at the prison, Yu-gun was brutally beaten by Ik-ho's men. Ik-ho knew the police raid was Yu-gun's doing. He took Yu-gun to a secluded area for interrogation. After a tense exchange, Ik-ho confirmed he had killed Yu-gun's brother, and Yu-gun swore to make him pay. Just then, the prison director stormed in, furiously demanding why Ik-ho had killed Director Bae. He drew his gun, intending to shoot Ik-ho, but Ik-ho remained unnervingly calm. As the director prepared to fire, Ik-ho swiftly disarmed and overpowered him.
네가 오늘부로 소장이다.
Then, he framed Yu-gun, coolly suggesting that Yu-gun had shot the prison director and then died by suicide. A perfect story. With that, Ik-ho walked away. His lackeys efficiently looped a rope around Yu-gun's neck and strung him up. But Yu-gun's former informant couldn't stand by. Silently, he cut the power and rescued Yu-gun. The two fled desperately as prison guards launched a full-scale manhunt. Knowing they stood no chance in a direct fight, they scrounged for gasoline and gas canisters, setting the entire prison ablaze. The massive explosion and fire quickly drew the attention of both fire departments and police, who raced toward the prison. Ik-ho knew it was over. All he wanted now was to find and kill Yu-gun. But to his surprise, Yu-gun appeared on the watchtower armed with a machine gun, staring him down. Yu-gun fired a burst of rounds at Ik-ho's feet, a clear challenge for him to come up and face him personally. Eager to finish off the man who had ruined his plans, Ik-ho climbed up, and the two engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand fight. But Ik-ho, known as the king of the prison, quickly gained the upper hand, pinning Yu-gun to the ground. As they struggled, armed SWAT teams swarmed the compound, and snipers lined the rooftops, laser sights fixed on Ik-ho. Determined to kill Yu-gun, or perhaps knowing escape was impossible, Ik-ho raised a metal rod to strike, and in that moment, sniper fire riddled his body. And so, the reign of the prison's most powerful figure came to a violent end.